terms of certainty, because I think we often speak as if you have either 100% or 0% certainty when it comes to matters of faith. But I think, as you raised with the example that you mentioned, in practical matters of life, it's very rare that we assume that we have 100% certainty or complete uncertainty. You know, like you see the weather report and you say, well, they usually underestimate the high by about 5 degrees. So that's probably a good gauge that it's not going to rain, but it could be warmer, you know. And so I think there always is this interplay of trust and the intellect. And I know in my own faith, one of the things I talk about in my book is following what I believe the Bible says about sexuality and relationships, and basically staking my love life on the idea that there was actually a spiritual being who inspired the Bible, and that he is real and trustworthy and good. So, you know, when you put yourself in a position like that, certainly you have to be engaging these sources and not just unquestioningly putting your trust in something that could have very significant impact on what your life looks like.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key to ask questions, to start asking questions. And the people I write about, many were cradle Catholics and had not questioned in this way before. I think one of the most interesting questions that I saw posed was, where do I find my faith? Is the faith that I find in this glorious house of worship the same as the faith that I can find marching outside the church, holding a candlelight vigil, walking in the redwoods? Wherever it is you find your faith. I think that's a really interesting question. And how beholden is your faith on a place? So these were some of the things that I thought were really profound, wonderful questions that were asked and also answered.
Yeah, so it sounds like the group grew.
They grew through the questions, through the questioning, through the finding the answers in very difficult times.
Yeah. Yes, and in a way, Anna, you said the same thing on an individual level. Growth.
I think one of the misconceptions that people have who say don't go to church about people who do go to church is that, how can you go to the Catholic Church? How can you believe what the church teaches on birth control, the ordination of women? How can you believe? And what people don't understand is, like, the vast majority of American Catholics don't follow church teaching on, say, on abortion or on women's ordination or birth control. And the same thing in the Protestant churches. I mentioned, that 57% of self-identified evangelical Christians think there's more than one way to heaven. So there is constantly questioning about doctrine. It's really only a very small kind of traditionalist element in all religions that really that even try to follow the party line, whatever that is. And one of someone mentioned community before, and Julian, one of the things, I reviewed Julian's book for the Chronicle, and I endorsed it too. I think it's a great book. One of the things I forgot to say, though, after I wrote the review, is what struck me about your group, which is a small group of kind of protesters within one Catholic church trying to keep the church open when the archdiocese are trying to close it. It was the power of the small group. One of the things that I've noticed is the power of small group spirituality, and that can be anything from, like, AA is a great example, AA, NA, any kind of a 12-step group, but also men's groups, women's groups, couples groups, Bible study groups, whatever it is. It almost doesn't matter what it is. There's a dynamic in small groups that people really find very strong faith in that. And what's so interesting in your book is that that's where they found their faith, and it wasn't anything to do with doctrine or anything. Or dogma. It was about community and finding sort of a common purpose.
Well, the community stepped in where this hierarchy failed.
And
very powerful lesson.
Robert Withnow, who's a sociologist of religion, has written books on something called the small group movement. And I really think it's one of the most vibrant things happening in the religious scene today. And it's the most obvious example is AA, but it goes way beyond AA.
Tony?
I actually grew up a Jehovah's Witness, and I was firmly in the belief system. And you're not to question the beliefs when you're in the Jehovah's Witnesses. But when you're there, and what in my book, Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk, I never want to confuse my beliefs to the beliefs of the character in the book, because the character in the book I respect very well through his belief system.
Right.
because that used to be me, and I have a kind of a romantic relationship with that past of myself, because I felt like I was in this community of hundreds of thousands of people, and that, you know, I was truly, truly loved and truly embraced. The minute the book came out, I received the apostasy stamp because I never was officially
Would
excommunicated.
you be willing to get up and show us the stamp?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
666 on my butt. And, no, but
Might work over at the end of it.
no, it was just a shame that all of a sudden I got actually awful responses from Jehovah's Witnesses who would not read the book and had no clue that it was a love story and that I did not get in the way of the characters and the narrative and anyway. And it only proved to me that I'm so glad I got the hell out of there. But, you know, there's still that, you miss that community, even though it's a very dysfunctional and awful community where they'll throw a scarlet letter on you.
How is it dysfunctional? Well, I mean, if you could, I know there's probably lots to say. Maybe if you could hone in on a core reason why you say it's a dysfunctional community.
Oh, well, just because you can't question. And once you do question, then you are considered an apostate, and they will have you, your family will shun you, and you lose everything. I had a friend who was 16 years old and got pregnant, and she was disfellowshipped, so she gets absolutely no help from anybody. And even though she lives at home with her mother, she only gets monetary help being underage. But boy, if she was 18, we could just kick her out because she went and did the Satan direction. So I'm seeing, as I grow up, that there's a 16-year-old mom who really needs help.
Yeah.
And if it was a Christian philosophy, they would be looking at her to help and not to shun as to clean the congregation.
Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses are interesting, and in some ways you could say they're more like, I don't take this in a derogatory way, they're more like a cult in a sense. A cult, meaning it's a new religious movement, and I think there's the newer religious movement is, with a lot of times, the less permission there is to question. And the Jehovah's, the Mormons are a good example. They're making that kind of leap from a persecuted cult, which they were for most of their history in this country. They're chased across the country, and there was basically a war with the Mormons in this country. But they're making the shift to a major world religion. So you're seeing more questioning within the Mormon Church and kind of liberal factions within the Mormon Church. And I don't know, maybe there's no such thing in the Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if there's a...
There is, because they call it as new light, and they tend to have this new light from God when certain rules and regulations start coming down from the government. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of babies who, they have the blood transfusion issue. So it's like people are dying because they won't take blood transfusions, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, well they can take blood fractions. God called and he said that if they take blood fractions, and that's cool. And then all of a sudden the lawsuits start pulling away. So God and lawyers are very hand in hand working together.
That's not unique to the Jehovah. I mean, the Latter-day Saints, of course, have revelations where they realize that maybe polygamy wasn't a good idea, and then black people can be a part. Yeah. So I think all religion, including the one that I grew up in, broadly speaking, Christianity, has been prone to maybe changing their minds as needed. Or adjusting to reality. I'm married to Kathy is Jewish and I'm Christian, and some people, the idea of cult is a very interesting one, because a lot of people have said Christianity is this cult that broke away from Judaism and just did well in the world. Scientology, of course, is probably the most famously called a cult in this country, and yet...
Speaking of lawyers, be careful when you mention
Right. Again, I don't want to get into trouble here, but a cult it's a little difficult because it may be in the eye of the beholder, right? But it's hard to define.
In one sense, it's somebody else's religion.
Yeah. So,
Well, all religions start as either sects or cults. I mean, Christianity was basically a sect. It was a sectarian movement within Judaism, and movements that start around one very charismatic, dynamic leader, often we call cults
Right.
for a while, until they're called religions.
I had the experience of, now the Bay Area is pretty famously seen as not, its reputation in the world would be as non-religious, or not anti-religious, but as, I would say, less religious than most areas in the country. And I worked at San Francisco, which became Harper One, and we recently published a book called Love Wins by a guy named Rob Bell, who's a very famous and very gifted evangelical preacher. He's really talented. You go on, I recommend going online to see Rob Bell's little videos, little short videos. They're very compelling. And Love Wins basically grew out of, he was at his Grand Rapids church, and they had a kind of some sort of diorama that people were adding to a sort of educational arts and craftsy thing in the hall to kind of encourage interaction. And somebody had put up a picture of Gandhi. And somebody else then wrote, "Let's get real, Gandhi's in hell." So Ron Bell saw this and thought, really? Gandhi's in hell, and you know this for a fact, and you feel it's important enough to write it. And so you really started meditating on that. And because it's a very interesting question. I mean, there is a theological argument for it and against it. Let's put it that way. Obviously, you can probably guess from the title Love Wins that Rob's argument is, no, we can't say that. That's not the message. That's not the gospel message. Now, the reason I bring Rob Bell up is because we as publishers do, created promotional t-shirts, and we do stuff like that to try to sell books. Remember, by the way, to buy books. Buy books. If you want books to keep being created, and you want books, really smart people to keep writing, you got to support them. Just a little speech there. So we promoted these t-shirts. And I said, Love Wins. And I put one on the other day, and I went to a party of very sophisticated Bay Area people. Very sophisticated. In fact, it was a party at Amy Tan's house, and it was for an author who was a scientist who was traveling in the country on book tour. And it was just a shirt. I put on this jacket over it. It was the shirt I was wearing all day. And a couple of the really smart people there came up to me, who didn't know me that well, not Amy, not those folks, but came up, who were just meeting me, said, "What's that? What's it say on your shirt?" And I said, "Love Wins." And then they said, "What's that about? What's that about?" And so finally, I guess they kept pushing me, and I felt compelled to explain about the evangelical preacher and that wanted Nance and what. And I really got a hostile reaction, a really hostile reaction. So I was surprised, and that got my dander up a little, because I feel like, wait a minute, I'm not hostile to religion, and I'm not proselytizing. It was kind of science against religion. It was one of those moments. It was kind of like, what a stupid idea religion is. Kind of. Almost. I don't want to oversimplify these. They were smart people, but it was a little of that edge. Has anyone ever encountered that kind of in the Bay Area?